So today's second lecture is The Way of Harmonious Teaching, a Yoshokai Aikido Guide to Pedagogy. So what we're going to learn today is how Aikido helps create a productive model for vocal pedagogy. And we're going to talk about what Aikido is. Even though we did the first lecture, and those who are here have seen the introduction, I'm going to do it again just for the sake of the video. So Aikido is a form of Japanese Budo. It's a Budo study, meaning that we study it to improve upon ourselves. It's a focused study on anything technical, usually something artistic. Other examples of this, which I didn't mention before, would be like flower arranging or calligraphy are forms of Japanese Budo. I think anything can be Japanese Budo if you have the right mindset to it and there's a systematic approach to it. Aikido comes from Aiki Jiu-Jitsu, which were war techniques, hand-to-hand combat, and weapons techniques that the samurai trained in for the battlefield. And after many, many years and a lot of change, it became Aikido, which is the way of instead of a war technique. And the purpose of it was, again, for self-improvement and reflection and focus and things of this nature. So we're going to have a brief demonstration of Aikido again, just to repeat what we did the last time. This technique is called first control throw. First control meaning controlling the first joint, the elbow joint. In Aikido, you can pause for a second. Thank you. In Aikido, we have two partners, Shitei and Uke. Shitei is the one who studies how to be on balance. They're the one who delivers the technique. To the outside eye, they look like they're winning. And Uke is the person who studies how to be off balance. They are the receiver of the technique, and they're the one that looks like they are losing to the outside eye. Again, please. Almost all the techniques for Uke end in a breakfall, which we'll talk about breakfalls here in a minute. If you could both do the technique separately as well. We're going to see Shitei's part first. Just once more. Thank you, sir. And then Uke's part. Thank you, sir. And then together, if you could. Thank you. That's great. So the purpose of doing these techniques separately is that we understand both parts, both sides of the technique. We can train and practice them on our own. This is certainly for safety's purpose, so that we understand how the technique works, so we're not thrown in a position that could hurt us. But it's also to have a very deep understanding of the technique, so that when we're working with our partner, we're helping them as best as possible. When Shitei studies how to be on balance, Shitei is doing this for the benefit of helping Uke study off balance. When Uke is studying off balance, they're doing this for the benefit of Shitei studying on balance. So the constant focus is, I want to help my partner learn these techniques to the best of their ability, as compared to, I want to do a great job for me. And the trust is with my partner. Will my partner help me? I want to help my partner. My partner will help me. So I'm going to train. I'm going to train very hard together. So how can we use Aikido to be better teachers, and specifically better teachers of singing? It's reasonable to say that Aikido is a great model, and our style of Aikido and our structure, our teaching method in Aikido can be applied to a lot of different disciplines, but I think that it's very helpful for singing in a couple of different ways. So today we're going to talk about 4 problem areas that teachers face, that I face every week. Lack of trust, state of mind, when to correct, how to correct, and what to correct, and that teaching has a strong requirement for empathy. So the first area is dealing with a lack of trust, and the 3 areas that I want to discuss about trust are the relationship between the student and the teacher, the student not trusting their own technique or their own ability, and then trust breaking down between the teacher and the student due to the nature of criticism. how does Aikido build trust? The relationship between uke and shite, which I just talked about, but we're going to do another demonstration with that, with how ego is produced. I just got to double check. All right, Rich and Joe are going to do all direction throw basic with dropping steps. Once more right before the dropping steps. So again, in this situation, if Joe wants to resist, it can be very painful, it can be very dangerous. If Rich were to be very aggressive, it can be very painful and dangerous for Joe's arm. And then this situation of the dropping steps, please go ahead, requires a lot of trust. You're falling backwards at the control of somebody else on your arm, and if you resist, you could break your own arm, so it can be very, very scary. Thank you, that's great. So in building trust between uke and shite, this happens as you continue to train. Also, if you've been training in Aikido for a long time and you're working with a new student, there are a lot of situations where maybe the student's idea, they're going to maybe come in a lot harder than you expect them to, or they're not going to have the finest technique, and so it's going to be more uncomfortable. I've had a couple of situations where it was pretty uncomfortable with somebody who was newly training because they didn't understand, and then I had to trust my own technique, but I also had to trust them that they still weren't going to try and hurt me and things of this nature. But working together with a partner all week long, multiple times a week, and dealing with these scary situations is a great model for building trust between teachers and students. Because when a student comes to you to learn how to sing, they're trusting that what you have to tell them is true and accurate. And they have to deal with the concept of what they sound like, trusting that what they sound like to themselves is not what they sound like to the rest of us. And it's very true. If you listen to yourself in a cell phone message, or back in the day, the old answering machine, we sound different to ourselves in recorded technology because the way that sound works in our own bodies is the sound is bouncing around inside our bodies and back to our ears, as well as it's bouncing outside. So what we hear is the sound that we produce outside and the sound that we're producing on the inside. So you really have to trust your teacher when your teacher says, no, that's the right way to go. That's the correct way to go. It takes a lot of trust. And it's hard, especially if you're approaching singing for a professional career and you want to approach a teacher and say, teach me how to sing better. If they don't, if that process is not beneficial, then what ends up happening is that you don't have your career. So there's a lot on the line for the teacher and for the student. Building trust is paramount. Doing Aikido, the potential of doing Aikido with a student-teacher relationship, it helps to build trust in a couple of different ways. Obviously with the techniques, but the teacher also has to then be in a situation, as we switch back and forth between shite and uke, to be thrown by their student, and the student then being thrown by their teacher. And having this relationship and working in this way under this kind of pressure multiple times a week definitely builds trust. And so this is how Aikido can help with that. The next demonstration is break falls. We're going to do 4 different break falls. We're going to do back break fall number 2 that Joe is going to demonstrate, and then we're going to do a jump back break fall that Rich is going to demonstrate. Awesome. Thank you, Joe. If I do it one more time, we'll get the other break falls too. So we take a long time to learn how to do our break falls. There are a lot of study methods. Actually, Joe, could you show the back break fall rocker just real quick? So we'll study from this position, doing a rocking motion and kicking our hips forward to get that. And then could you also do it from just squatting? And then a full break fall. And the slapping is to disperse the force to make the fall safer. Thank you, sir. And we'll do the other break falls here in a second. The other two break falls that we're going to show is Joe doing forward roll number 1, and then Rich doing jumping forward break fall number 1. Then Joe, could you also do it from kneeling? Actually, could you do it all the way down from reach through the ankle? This is to demonstrate how we learn to do this. Sometimes these break falls look really scary, but we break it down a lot to teach somebody how to do the rolling technique, and then from kneeling. And then full forward roll. Thank you, sir. And then one more, just the jumper, which is the reason he's jumping over his arm is that there are a lot of techniques that we have where stay still holding onto the arm, you can't roll over it. And so, thank you very much. So this is to deal with the student not trusting their own technique. In Aikido, we don't trust our own technique with the break falls. As you can imagine, it's not very comfortable to fall on the ground incorrectly. It can be very painful sometimes. And to do these things, there are two common fears. The most common fears among people are the fear of public speaking, which makes a lot of sense, and the fear of falling down, which makes a lot of sense. Obviously in singing, it's public speaking to like the next power in public, but the fear of falling down, we address that every single time we train, and it helps to build confidence, and it helps to build confidence in the idea of, well, if I just train hard and I trust my technique, this thing that is scary will be okay. It's very scary to go for a high note. Everyone is afraid of singing high notes. Luciano Pavarotti, who was considered the king of the high C, which is the money note for the tenor, was once asked by somebody, now that you've been singing for so many years, are you still afraid of the high C? And he said, without hesitating, what sane man isn't? So the king of the high C, the king of the high note, was still afraid of the high note. Trusting your technique, knowing that it's going to be there. You can't force your high notes, you have to let them come. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't, and that never really changes. You can only, change the percentage of it not happening a little bit, but there's always the risk. It's always there, otherwise they're not done in the right way. So trusting your technique is hard, but being presented a situation outside of singing that's not going to fatigue the voice, to learn this idea, this mental, physical approach of I trust my techniques, I trust my partners, is very helpful. Also, there's a model that I follow in my lessons with my students. When they're done singing something, I'll ask them to give me 2 positive things that they've done, and then only 1 negative thing that I would reframe as something of a constructive criticism, meaning that something that you can change right now. So as an example, the student gets done singing and they say, oh, I think that really sucked. I didn't like that at all. Well, what's something that you can change right now? Singing is not something that we do in a day, it's not something we do in a week, it's something that we do over the course of many years. You're constantly shoring up little things, changing little things you can control. And the 2 positive reflections for one, also coming from the student. This is to deal with the nature, sorry, I should have said this before, the nature of criticism between teachers and students and building trust. That if the positive reflections are coming from the student, and the student is feeling better about the situation, which I don't mean that to say I want them to feel happy and fluffy and rosy and good. It's that they really do practice feeling positive about the things that they're doing well so that they reinforce those things. But then the criticism coming from the student and something that's manageable helps to deal with this nature. I will still I'll still point things out. I have to as a teacher, as any teacher does. But I think that when the student also takes responsibility for that themselves and says, well, okay, I'll only focus on one thing and then I've accomplished that one thing, it really helps to build trust between the teacher and the student. It also helps to build trust for the student themselves and their own technique, and it avoids this problem of corrections and the nature of them. So the next area is state of mind. Students coming in and being resistant to new technical ideas. This challenges things that they feel confident about. Students coming in and not having a lot of self-confidence in their own ability that day, or just maybe the state that they're in, they're just not feeling very confident. Their last practice might not have gone well, their last performance might not have gone very well. And then also sometimes just lacking a desire to have a lesson that day, but that's the day you have your lesson and you gotta come in and sing. I've dealt with this a lot and many other issues in regards to the state of mind, but how I used to approach these things. When a student would come in and be resistant to new technical ideas, I would say, when you're working with a director or a conductor or a coach and they have these ideas that they want you to do, if you're going to be resistant, you're not going to get very far in the professional world. And I would find that students didn't care. It wasn't something that was immediately problematic for them because they weren't in the professional world. Or when students would lack trust in their own technique or their ability to do it, I would heap lots of encouragement on them. And I would do it too much to the point where they wouldn't believe me. And it didn't actually have any positive effect at all. And then lastly, when I talk about a student having a negative state of mind in the lesson, that they didn't really want to have a lesson that day, that it wouldn't carry them very far in life or in general, and I still might touch on these things, but ultimately I would find that the student's state of mind didn't really change, and that how they felt ultimately trumped the expectations placed on them. It wasn't until I started to really think about maybe how could I use Aikido and the things that we do in Aikido to address these issues, I started to come up with things that were very, very helpful. Talking about building your own house, there's a story of an old home builder in Japan, very famous home builder in Japan, and I'll give you the abridged, abbreviated version. He was about to retire, and he approached his boss and said, I'd like to retire, and his boss said, can you build us one more house for a very special client, and then you can retire? And he was like the Frank Lloyd Wright of Japan, so everyone wanted a house built by him. Normally he would pay attention to all of the materials used, and he would be looking at the workers and making sure they were doing everything correct. And he was very frustrated, and he said, okay, I'll do it. I'll build this house. But his heart wasn't in it. He didn't really show up, in the same way. He was there. The home got built. It was built to code, but it wasn't special. It didn't have his touch. He got done, and he came to his boss. He said, okay, the home is done. I'd like to retire now. And his boss said, oh, I have one more favor to ask you. Would you please open this box? Inside the box were a set of keys. He says, the house is yours. We wanted this to be for you. This was our gift to you. Thank you so much for all of your hard work. And the home builder immediately was just destroyed inside. He goes, oh no, I've shamed myself. This whole time I was building my own house and I didn't even know. So I try to approach it the same way with my students. Maybe I'll use this analogy or another idea of saying everything that you do right now, if you want to be that great singer, everything that you do every single day is building your voice. It's building your house. It's the house you live in. So when you don't practice very well, or you're really resistant to new technical ideas, that's the house you're going to live in. That's the voice you're going to have. And it puts the responsibility back on them. I also talk about discouragement is the greatest tool for evil. It's another story of an old witch who was going to sell all of her tools. She was getting ready to retire, and then she was on her deathbed, and her niece, who was supposed to inherit them, came to her and said, all of your tools are gone. You only have this one shoddy tool left, and it's all worn out. I can't believe you did this to me. And her aunt said, well, that's you're misunderstanding. That's the greatest tool of all. It's discouragement. It's worn and it's used because I've used it more than any other tool. No one expects that it comes from you. It always comes from inside. And discouragement is the thing that can destroy the greatest of dreams. And so again, to encourage my students to say, if you're feeling discouraged or if you're thinking negatively about what you're doing, you're just destroying your own dreams. If you're approaching this in a negative way, you're just destroying what it is that you want to become. Instead, don't let discouragement do this to you. Another thing that I try to talk about, and I haven't explored this as much in terms of asking students to maybe dress up for lessons. I've known other teachers that do this, and I've thought about it, but I don't want to put the wrong kind of pressure. But our uniform, our dogi, is our training clothes. Actually, sir, could you stand up so I can point out? I have the picture of it here, but our dogi is white, it's clean, it's pristine, and it is, as you can see, this is ironed and very well presented. Our patch is the Yatsuno Kagami, which I'll explain in a second. Our training uniform, we've had lectures on this, that how we fold our dogi when we're done training, we're very careful with it. We don't use it as a towel if we're really sweaty. We don't throw it on the ground. We very carefully fold it, put it back nicely. But then when we're training, if we end up tearing our uniform in some way because we're training hard, that's okay, because it's our uniform. And it's to help us to train, it's to help us to get better. Thank you, sir. in the same idea that when I put on my dogi to train, or when I put on my suit to do a lecture or to sing, I'm putting on my training clothes. I'm putting on a different state of mind. When I step on the mat, the appropriate etiquette is to leave the problems that I'm dealing with off the mat. It's a benefit to me to study, to say I don't have to deal with the things that are stressing me out right now, so I get a break from it when I'm on the mat. But it's also, I don't want to give my bad feelings to my partner when I'm training with them. They've showed up to train with me, they're here to work hard for me, I want to work hard for them. And it's the same thing, the idea, the reminder of putting on the uniform, how we put it on. It's even, we put it on left over right, and the reason for that is that way, way, way back, when samurai walked around with swords, they would draw their sword with the right hand. The left hand was more of the passive side or the inactive side. So it's to say, I'm not going to be aggressive, I'm going to be nice, I'm going to be kind, I'm going to be passive, I'm going to work for my partner, I'm not going to fight against them. So this reminder, I think it's the same when we put on a costume for a show. And you see a singer the first time they put their costume on in a dress rehearsal, everything changes a little bit. It's better, there's more energy, they feel better, they feel more confident, it's easier to be in the role. We should always strive to be that way. Every time we practice, no matter where we are, no matter what space we're in, especially in our lessons, to show up and sing like it's our performance, sing like we are performing on the greatest stage in the world. And so the idea of our dogi reminds me of that. And then the Yata no Kagami, which is our patch, is an ancient mirror legend in Japan. I won't get into it too much just for the sake of time, but it's the idea that I am a mirror of my partner. That when I'm training, I need to be the way I want my partner to be. It's kind of like the idea of I want to treat others the way I want to be treated, but it's in how I behave on the mat. And it's the same in the lesson. If I want my student to be respectful, if I want my student to be open to change, if I want my student to have confidence, I need to be respectful, I need to be open to change, and I need to be willing to take a risk with them. If I'm not there, they're not going to be there. I have to be their mirror. And training in this idea and understanding these ideas helps me to be a better teacher infinitely. It's no longer a competition or fighting between me and my students. You know, sometimes that happens, but not so much, not anymore. So the next section is corrections. Every new teacher, well, every teacher on the planet, I think, because I still worry about this, is worrying about corrections in terms of when to correct a beginning student and when to correct an advanced student. What to correct. And in this, am I hearing what I want to hear? Have I just gotten used to hearing my student and I've convinced myself that I know what they sound like, or am I really listening to what they're saying? And then how to correct. Is what I am telling my student actually helping? When I first started teaching, there were a lot of times I would find myself listening to my student and I thought I knew what they sounded like, but then they would go to sing a performance or a competition and I would go, wow, that's not the way I taught them to sing. And then they come back to the next lesson and that would be the same thing. I realized I wasn't listening very carefully to what they were singing. And then, there were a lot of times when I would have corrections from my teacher and I thought, oh, that's so great. I love that. That's a nugget of information that's so important. I'm going to go to my students this week and I'm going to tell them all about it. And it didn't help. Either they weren't ready for it or I didn't understand it as well as I thought I did. It wasn't very helpful. And then when to correct. In the beginning, when I first started teaching, I would give students so many corrections in the beginning because I would hear so many things. And it was from a desire to be helpful. I wanted to be a good teacher. I wanted to fix things. And my students just got confused. And then also with the students that had a lot more experience, I would find that if I gave them too many corrections, they would either get frustrated with me and think, well, I know how to sing. I've been singing for years. And who is this guy telling me all these things that I'm doing wrong? Or they would get discouraged and think, oh, maybe I didn't really know how to sing all this time. It didn't help. So how did Aikido help me to be a better teacher when it comes to corrections? Ukai Hirigimi is an idea, it's a teaching method in Aikido. Ukai is the softer side, Hirigimi is the harder side. And it's the idea of slowly building your student up in the ratio of corrections. And it comes from birds of prey. Why do I have a picture of a bird feeding a baby bird? The Japanese samurai studied birds of prey, and they would see how do they train the greatest killers. They were revered, these birds. Falconing was a really big deal in Japan. And they would look and say, how do they train these birds? What would happen is that when the chicks were newly born, the mother would come back and would have food already digested, give it to the baby, and the baby would just learn to love eating. There was no challenge to it, it was just loving eating. And then, as the baby grew, then the mother would bring actual meat, and then the baby might be frustrated. You know, now I have to work hard to eat. But then they started to enjoy the process of learning how to eat in that way, and then they got more confident. And then the mother would bring a dead animal, and then the baby had to learn how to take care of the dead animal. I know this is fairly disgusting, but we get to the point. And then at the end, when the baby was about to leave the nest, the mother would start to bring animals that weren't dead. They would be injured. But then the baby was afraid, oh, I'm going to get attacked back by this animal, and I don't know what to do, but I'm hungry. And then learning to deal with that and be confident with it. That method extrapolated to Aikido in the beginning, students make a lot of mistakes. There are a lot of ideas and concepts of what it should be as compared to what it is. And if you correct every single thing that they do, then they're not going to be very confident. And then they're not going to take the risk in the more advanced techniques. Most of the techniques that have been demonstrated today are fairly advanced. The other ones that we have for beginning students are more broken down, but still, it can be very scary. But then the Harmonious side of things is necessary, and just in the same way, at a certain point to grow, it's going to be uncomfortable. At a certain point to grow, you're going to be challenged, and it's going to be stressful and frustrating, and you have to learn how to get past that, how to deal with that. You have to build your students up with enough confidence that then they can deal with those difficult things. And then judging this, the ukai and the harigimi, where are they at? It's daily, but to keep this in mind has been very helpful for me as a teacher in this teaching model. To deal with, I'm going to back up just a second. To deal with what to correct, am I hearing what I want to hear, or am I really listening to my students singing? There's another idea called shoshin, which is beginner's mind. It's an open, eager attitude to learning as if one is a beginner. This comes from a lot of Zen study. The first time that we ever did anything, first time we ever learned to drive a car, we paid attention to everything that somebody told us. Where's the brake pedal? Where's the gas pedal? Where's the shifter? I don't know what I'm doing. The first time we learned how to dance, the first time we learned how to play an instrument, the first time we learned to play a sport or a game, we're paying attention so closely to everything that's being said. And then after a period of time, we've listened to it and listened to it, then there are certain things that we don't pay attention to so much anymore. We're not as receptive to new ideas, especially if we think that we have some mastery over something. Oh, I know how to do this. I don't need to listen to anyone's directions on driving, for example. No one needs to tell me how to drive. I know how to drive. I'm a great driver. Things like this. But this idea of shoshin, we're encouraged with our etiquette within Aikido to approach things as though we have done this the first time. Even though I've gotten 1,000 corrections on my 45-degree pivot, which is one of the first pivots that we've learned, there's always more to learn. And if I have my mind closed off to that, it's going to be very difficult for me to learn how to do that pivot better. In the same way that if I'm listening to my students sing and I'm not really listening to them, like the first time I ever heard them sing for me, I'm going to miss something, and I'm not going to teach them to the best of my ability. I'm not going to catch everything that I could catch, or maybe catch the thing that is causing the other issues that I'm hearing. If I don't listen carefully, if I just go, oh, I know what this student sounds like, I've heard them sing for the last 3 months, I don't need to listen that carefully, I'm going to miss something. So shoshin is a great reminder to say, what is it that I'm really hearing? And it's the same thing with the advanced students. Someone comes in singing for a long time, and maybe I'm used to the situation, I'm used to hearing them sing, or maybe I'm listening to them sing and think, oh, it's a really nice technique, I don't really have anything to say. But if they're coming to me for a lesson, I have to have something for them to say. That's my job. So I have to listen very carefully each time, like it's the first time that I ever heard them sing. It helps me to be a better teacher, to pick out things to teach them. And then lastly, the art of one correction. Is what I'm teaching my student actually helping them to learn? This is Takashi Kushida Sensei, who is the founder of our association for Aikido. And he had this art of giving one correction, or the ability to stand in front of the class and say one thing that he wanted everyone to think about doing. And it didn't matter if you were a 4th degree black belt or if you was like your 2nd class. The thing that he had to say for everybody was beneficial to everybody in the room. And he stuck to that one idea or that one correction. He didn't give too many ideas or too many thoughts or too many things. this was very helpful for me, especially if it was either giving too many corrections or I really want to tell my student about this thing that I just learned in my lesson with my teacher and it was so great that I had to learn to take a step back and say, no, today we're just working on breathing, or today we're just working on posture. Even if I heard 7 or 8 things that I really wanted to address, no, I have to stick to this, because in having one correction and sticking to it, it's harder for the teacher, but it's better for the student, because then you're guaranteeing you're giving something to the student that is helpful. You're giving something to the student that's going to make them better. Even if they're frustrated that they want to go further, they want to learn something different. Today, this is the day we have to do it this way to ensure that it's going to be better and beneficial. So the art of one correction. So the next area that we're going to talk about is, the last area is a strong requirement for empathy. I've heard a lot of stories of people talking about teachers and coaches that completely lacked empathy, that would dress them down in front of everybody or say something that was just really cruel. I know people that are in their 50s and 60s that somebody said something to them in high school about their singing that they still remember. They still hold on to it. And if you don't have empathy as a teacher for your student and where they're at, because your students will come to you and they'll be very vulnerable, maybe they'll be rude, maybe they won't, maybe they'll have low energy, maybe they'll have great energy. You still have to be empathetic. You don't know where they're coming from, what happened to them earlier that day. It's very easy to sit back and just listen to somebody and go, well, I hear all these problems and I don't care where you're at. You've shown up to my lesson. You need to do a good job. And if you don't, then, well, that's on you. I taught you the best that I could. I don't think that this is really great teaching. I've heard, unfortunately, a lot of stories. I've been in situations myself where I've had coaches say things, thankfully no teachers, but I've had coaches. A vocal coach is somebody who is an expert in languages and they're an expert on the piano and they shape musical ideas and phrases. I've had coaches say some of the most offensive things to me, and I've had friends who cried and were really broken down by the things that were said to them. And I always thought and wondered, why is that necessary? These people don't have empathy. They wouldn't want someone to say that to them. Singers themselves can be catty, selfish, unkind, and it's, again, because of pressure, the idea we were talking about before with the divas and the attitude. I don't think that most people that go into this career by nature are that way. I think that this career can produce the worst sides of people because there is so much pressure. It is competitive. You are competing with your friends for work. This can create the worst in some people. And it can be very, very challenging to deal with a really catty and selfish singer, especially as a teacher. And then the idea that we give our students our own bad habits. I'll come back to this in a second, but it's something that Sensei told to me once. I would say, I don't understand. I go to my lesson, all week long I've taught lessons, and then I go to my lesson and my teacher is teaching me the thing that I taught my students. Why is that happening? That's so frustrating. I feel like I don't have the authority to teach my students anything. If I'm being told what I'm trying to tell them to do correctly, I can't even do it correctly myself. And Sensei just looked at me and he said, we always give our students our bad habits. And it was this weight on my shoulders. I felt, oh, that's just such an enormous responsibility. So how does Aikido help when it comes to lacking empathy? This is a poem by Kushida Sensei. A tree is a tree, soft grass is soft grass, the wind blows through them. And the purpose of this poem, the idea of this poem is to say that a tree is strong and sturdy and the wind blows, the tree stands there and it can deal with the wind. The soft grass will blow all over the place. The tree cannot have the experience of the soft grass. It's a strong tree. And it's not right for the tree to think, oh, I'm stronger than the soft grass. Because the grass could look at the tree and say, yeah, but you're not flexible. You can't move. The idea is to say, I am empathetic to your situation. It's different. It's not better or worse. It's just different. We deal with this, again, all the time in Aikido. When someone comes to me and maybe they're having a really hard time, they just feel aggressive or frustrated or upset or they're down, I can't judge them. I have to work with them. Maybe I feel like the strong tree, they feel like the soft grass. Maybe I feel like the soft grass and they feel like the strong tree. We have to make fit. Learning empathy, especially with the techniques, a lot of things that you've seen. You don't have empathy for your partner. if you're being thrown by them, and maybe you've thrown them just a second ago and it was pretty rough, and maybe they feel like they're going to get up and they're going to show you what they can do. If you feel empathy for them, you say, I don't want my partner to feel that way. I don't want them to be angry or frustrated with me. I want them to have a good feeling in their training. And they're going to want to have that with you too. It teaches empathy. It teaches empathy especially in the context of working with somebody else on another level outside of music. And then, os, the idea, I will endure while being pushed, is used as a greeting, as a way of saying thank you, as a response to getting a correction or a way of saying goodbye. Multiple times today we've bowed to each other. You might have heard this word, os. Sometimes we say it strongly, sometimes it's a little quieter. The idea is, it's two words, oshi and shinobu, to be pushed and to endure, or to push and to endure. So it's to say, I will endure while being pushed. It's a way of thinking, it's a way of training, it's a way of practice that maybe my training is difficult, maybe my situation is hard, maybe people are being unkind to me, taking it back to the singers being catty and selfish. But if we train in this idea of, with this concept of os, everything that we do, that's why we say it in the beginning, when we greet each other, that's why we say it as a response to receiving a correction for a technique, or in response to giving a correction of technique, or just in response to just about anything. We say this as a reminder of, oh, I'm training. This is the way that I'm training. And it's expected that we carry this outside of the dojo. So in being in this environment, once again, that idea from the previous lecture of the energy with form, training my mind to think I'm always going to endure while being pushed, helps me to not be that catty singer. It helps me to deal with the catty singer. And it's also helped me, and I'll maybe talk about this in a lot of different ways with my students, to encourage them away from responding or reacting in a negative way because of the pressures that they're dealing with. And then lastly, when it comes to, we will give our students our bad habits. There's an old Zen teaching of chop wood, carry water. There's a book related to it that I think is really great by the same name. But where it comes from is that samurai archers, as a part of their training, would chop wood and carry buckets of water. Old traditional dojos, they didn't have central heating, they didn't have electricity, they didn't have plumbing. This is what you use to get by in your daily life. There are still traditional dojos in Japan that do this as a way of, I'm chopping this wood in a specific way to train my technique for archery. I'm carrying these buckets of water to strengthen my arms and my core for this. But the idea is that, that's what we do in the beginning, but maybe we don't want to do that anymore. Maybe we've gotten really good at being our samurai archer, or as a singer, maybe I've gotten really, really great at singing. I don't need to warm up anymore. I don't need to do vocal exercises anymore. Let me just go straight to the aria. I just need to sing. And there's a lot of problems that are presented with that. So what is our version of chopping wood and carrying water as teachers? How do I go back to the beginning of being a good teacher? How do I avoid being in a situation where I've taught for so many years and I have so many successful students, and so everyone just needs to listen to what I have to say? Well, if I approached teaching like that in the beginning, I wouldn't have any students. How did I approach teaching in the beginning? I was kind, calm, open, excited, welcoming to the people in my studio, and I didn't throw around my knowledge and my weight the way that I might be able to if I have more confidence. I go back to those ideas. It's the same thing in Aikido. We study the basics every single class. There are a lot of really advanced techniques, and they look great, and they feel great when you do them correctly, and they're a lot of fun. But if we don't know our basic techniques, we don't know our pivots, we don't know how to break fall, if we don't practice these things, then we're going to be limited, and we're going to limit our partners as well. And then what do we do with students who just want to go straight to singing the exciting aria? How do we deal with that? Again, encompassing back on the ideas that are presented before, and saying when you're building your own house, how do you want that house to be built? You're building your own voice. Do you really want to skip the foundation? Do you really want to build your house on something shoddy that could fall over? You're not going to be ready for the exciting aria. Sometimes I'll let my students sing something that's harder, more advanced for them, just so that they have that experience themselves without having to tell them. But always coming back to the basics and making that foundation important. And then again, how do we still chop wood and carry water as teachers, which I addressed. But going back to the idea of we will always give them our bad habits. And I think that that's the most important aspect of being a good teacher, is being very aware of the habits that we have. What are my habits as a teacher? How do I teach my students? Am I really listening to them when they give me their response to the question that I've asked them? Am I asking rhetorical questions, or am I actually asking them questions that I want an answer to? How am I communicating with them? Am I saying the right words? Am I approaching the situation with the right feeling and the right energy? What are my habits? My students are my mirror. If I want to know how good of a teacher I am, I just look at my students, because they're growing or not growing based on what I'm doing and what they're doing. But if they're growing, how they're growing, I'm influencing that. And if I'm frustrated with my students, I need to be frustrated with myself. If I'm proud of my students, it's because I've done a good job, and so on and so forth. So before we get to the final thoughts, I'll leave the slide up there. I'm actually going to have Jamie come up and sing, because again, this is a lecture recital, but it would be oddly self-serving of me to sing in a recital about teaching. Instead, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. I'm going to have my students sing. What Jamie's going to do is he's going to sing the first page of an art song called Der Lindenbaum by Schubert. He's going to sing it just the way that he knows it. I'm going to have Jamie kind of put himself into kind of a contorted position and sing it again. And then I'm going to have Jamie hold the bokken the way that you saw in the previous lecture in Khmer, sing it again, and then one final time without it. And we're going to just kind of listen and compare. Whenever you're ready, sir. We have talked about this before, we've practiced a little bit, but this is to demonstrate why posture is so important to singing. Sometimes we miss it a little bit. The music in enough of a spot you can see it, you feel good. You feel good and feeling bad. All right, one more time. How would you compare those two? How is that different for you? What did that feel like?
It felt very shallow.
Shallow.
It did not feel like I was able to get my sound across the room in any way. Obviously singing at the floor didn't really help that. But
And did it feel shallow in what way? Are you talking about the tone, the space inside your throat, the breath? What felt shallow?
I did feel like I could actually get a fairly decent breath. And because I was over in that position, I was able to engage my core, and I was kind of forced to engage my core. However, it felt like I wasn't able to get a lot of space. I wasn't able to get the resonant sound that we usually try and achieve.
And do you think that was because of the position that you were in?
Definitely.
Cool. All right. So now we're going to put Jamie in position with the bokken called kamai. The basic stance that we hold the kamai in, or hold the bokken in. A little less space between your feet. Yes. Back to the forward, a little bit more. Good. Just out. Yes. Good. Forward. Great. Good. And one more time, if you would, sir.
Was singing to the tip of the sword and focusing my sound to the tip of the sword. I was going
to say, thank you for saying that. I forgot to tell him to do that. Something that we've done in the past. So, awesome.
Yes. Another thing, I've been working this week actually in practicing. I've been trying to take very large breaths from the diaphragm and trying to engage my core while singing. So I was trying to make sure that I did take big breaths, large breaths, and keep my core engaged while holding the bokken and singing out through the...
Do you feel like it was easier or harder for you to do it with the bokken as compared to when you were in a contorted position?
I don't know what it is, but with that position I have always felt and still feel like I can take a bigger breath, and it is easier for me to relax and open up downwards especially, and get as much air as I can before I sing.
And do you feel like it's also true in the first way that you sang before, putting you in a contorted position, that it's easier with this?
I think yes, that is definitely helpful.
So obviously we can't have everybody going on stage holding a sword and then singing, as cool as that might be for some people to see. But again, this is the idea from a lot of the things we talked about before, especially shisei, shamaste, the energy with form, and being in this position. The reason why it's easier to have that lower feeling is that these muscles are more expanded because we're leaning more forward, and so we're allowing these muscles to actually be a little bit more relaxed because we're in better balance. And singing to the tip of the sword has a couple of different benefits. One is that we're not moving all over the place, because we would see it. We want the sword to stay where it is. That helps us to keep our body very, very stable. Holding the sword and having everything expanded engages these muscles lightly, does not stiff or tight, so we still want to be able to move, but it engages the muscles light enough that without us thinking about it, we're more engaged, we have more support. Did I ask you to be louder when you were holding the bouquet?
No.
Were you louder?
I have no idea.
Was he louder?
Yes.
It was a lot louder. It was bouncing all over the room. Your lines were longer. You took fewer breaths. And the other thing that can happen with this too is that sometimes in feeling the body activated in that way, we'll have more energy when we're singing than the singer. We don't know what to do with it. And it's easier to sing, and we'll try and overcompensate. So I can tell that maybe you were a little nervous about the high note. You felt like it was a little pressure as compared to the first time. That's a totally normal thing. So it's not like, I'm not saying snake oil, to cure all, just put a stick in your hand so you can learn how to sing. But it's an idea of, that this body position and demonstrating it can be very helpful. So we're going to do it one more time now that you've had this experience. And I want you to think about what you just experienced and how that felt. And try and get that low breath. And remember all those things we talked about.
I don't know if this is, but when I was holding the bouquet, I definitely felt my breaths were expanding downwards.
Mm-hmm.
This one, it was more forwards.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that made any difference. Also, previously, before I held it, I was looking at the point, but I wasn't really focusing on the point. Now, after I focused on the point of the sword, now I'm focusing on that crack in the wall,
Mm-hmm.
right there, and I'm trying to make sure that I keep myself stable in pointing. So as opposed to a difference, I'm saying more of a similarity, is that I'm trying to keep myself as still and stable as possible while singing.
Do you think that's helpful?
Yes.
Cool. Could you guys hear a difference in the 4 different ways?
Mm-hmm.
Or in small differences, slight different things. And again, this is the idea that singing is not done overnight, it's not done in a week or in a month or even a year. It's making small changes over a period of time. So, well, great, Jamie. That was fantastic. Thank you so much. Round of applause. Thank you very much. I'm sorry. So, some final thoughts. Again, the theme with both of these lectures is that Aikido is supplemental. It's a study method. It's a way for us to study how to be better singers. It's a way for us to study how to be better teachers outside of the studio, outside of the rehearsal. There's a pedagogue at Northwestern. His name is Stephen Smith, and he wrote A Naked Voice, A Guide to Holistic Singing. I think I'm paraphrasing that title. One of the things that he talked about a lot was trying to find things outside of singing that you can do to help you to be a better singer. And along my journey in thinking about this, before I ever decided to try and get a doctorate, I thought about that. I thought, well, Aikido is my way. I want to be clear that I'm not saying, as I said before in the previous lecture and in this, I'm not saying that there's something wrong with running or that running is bad. I'm not saying there's something wrong with yoga or that yoga is bad or something wrong with swimming or swimming is bad. They present challenges in the same way that Aikido can present some challenges. I just think that Aikido is a way, and it's a reliable way to become a better, stronger, healthier, more rounded singer because of training in Aikido. So there are great books on pedagogy, and as I was looking and reading a lot of different books on pedagogy, they had a lot of exercises and things that you could give to a student for singing a high note or singing a long phrase or singing a lot of words very quickly. But they didn't really address when to give those exercises and how to give those exercises. It just gave these exercises. I think that Aikido helps us to learn when to apply those exercises. And I mean that just in terms of, are they physically ready and being really attentive and listening? Are they emotionally ready? Are they mentally ready? Are we ready in that relationship between student and teacher to take it to that next level? Is this next challenge going to be appropriate? I think Aikido definitely helps me know when to make those changes and to introduce these new ideas and techniques. And I think that Aikido can absolutely be a great model for new teachers and teachers who have been teaching for many years to supplement what they do as a teacher, to supplement what they do as a singer. So thank you very much. Do you guys have any questions before we end? No questions. All right, well, thank you very much. Thank you for coming.